Hey, high school students. Sure do miss seeing you guys. But that's how it goes. You do need to download the Zoom meeting app. We're going to that. We're going to have a time that we'll meet each week. So, get that ready. So when that comes around, we can do that. What else? I've been putting some grades on RenWeb for you. I got some other things to grade. Some of you I've emailed that I haven't found certain things, and get those in. Need to start. There's going to be some consequences. I mean, this is all new, so I've been kind of lenient on stuff like that. So let's get all this stuff turned in so that we can get going where we need to be going. We'll have the chapter 21 and 22 test on Thursday, so you got a couple of days to get ready for that. I'm going to be talking about chapter 22. We've talked before about chapter 21, and we're going to do 22, and then the test on 21 and 22 will be this Thursday. So make plans for that. As you do the work and study and all, make sure you're writing complete answers and having enough stuff written down that it will help you to do well on the test. Also, honors, there will be an extra question. Last time, very few of you answered it. So look for that and answer that. I didn't take it off because it's all new, but do look for that when you see the test on Thursday. Okay, chapter 22, of course, is about the coming of the Great Depression. A lot of people are speculating that we're going to have a Great Depression again with all this stuff going on, businesses shutting down and all this stuff, the reason why we're not in school and why I'm talking to you on the video. The Roaring Twenties that we studied about, it was after World War I. It was after the situation they had with the flu that killed millions of people around the world back in 1919. Things were going very well. They had ended. The war's over. The flu's over. People are making money all over the place. I mean, it was a good time. They called it Roaring Twenties because just things were just going wild during this time. And of course, all this leads to the Great Depression in 1929 because people weren't being smart. It's important to be smart, so. Do your best to be smart when you can. Some of the causes, like I said, the 20s, a lot of people were making lots of money. One of the biggest problems was credit. Credit's a good thing. You can get a lot of stuff. I mean, we wouldn't have a house or a car if we didn't have credit. And so credit's important. And as you get older, you'll find out how important it is. It can really get you in trouble, or it can really be something that'll help you a lot, depending on how you use it, your self-discipline and all that sort of stuff. But in the 20s, people would get money easy. Just go to the bank. You could borrow money, no problem. You could get any kind of credit to buy, just basically whatever you wanted to do, and that among some other things, some of the causes for the Great Depression. That people don't do smart stuff with is what the situation is. Businesses were doing really well during, again, this is after the war. They've switched over from the wartime economy to now making things that people want. A lot of new inventions and things. So they're manufacturing lots of cool stuff, and people are buying it, and so people are making a lot of money. But as the 20s go on, they're making more than people are buying, and so that's going to lead to a problem where they have to lay people off and things of that nature. Farmers Here again, they were making a lot of money on their farm products, and so they were growing more than they needed, and didn't have anybody to buy it. And so there again, it goes back to economics, which y'all will be taking in your senior year, about the law of supply and demand. They were making more than the people anybody wanted to buy, and so that led to problems, which causes prices to drop, which cause people to get laid off, and so you have a lot of things like that that's causing problems. Another thing that caused the Great Depression that was taking place in the 20s was the stock market. Stock market was booming. People were just making lots of money. It had gotten to the point to where you could buy stock sort of on credit. You had to have 10%. They called it speculation, because you think, well, everybody's making money, so I'm going to make money. So you speculate that they would only make you pay 10% for it. And then later on, when they want this back, you don't have it. That became a problem. So those were the major causes of the Great Depression during the Roaring '20s. The mainly was credit, but the manufacturing making too much than people were buying. The farmers growing too much. The farmers buying more equipment and property, and all this sort of stuff. These things all led to shortages, all led to what would eventually happen in 1929 that started the Great Depression. In the election of 1928, a guy named Herbert Hoover he gets elected president. He had been involved in World War I on the administration side for Woodrow Wilson, and he got a good reputation for the way that he handled things, and so he's pretty popular, and he gets elected president in 1928. Things were going really well, and so on October 29th of 1929, that's when the stock market crashed. And so that day was called Black Tuesday. It was on Tuesday, October 29th in 1929, that the stock market crashed. And then this leads to, not right away, Hoover, matter of fact, there's a quote here in your book. Let me find that. What was that? About he didn't want to take any action. He thought the market would correct itself, and usually it does. Sometimes it doesn't. But so a lot of the people today think that with this thing going on with the coronavirus and all that the stock market has gone down quite a bit, and they think that's just a correction. But when Hoover here on page 685, turn there. It's in section 3, personal voice, Herbert Hoover. That's page 685. And here's what he says about this. He says, our first objective must be to provide security from poverty and want. We want to see a nation built of homeowners and farm owners. We want to see their savings protected. We want to see them in steady jobs. We want to see them more and more of them insured against death and accident, unemployment, and old age. We want them all secure. And so it sounds good, but the people just didn't feel like that he did that. During this time, they didn't feel like he was doing those things that he had talked about. They wanted him to do more, try to get more bills to Congress for Congress to pass, and all, and they were disappointed in him that he didn't do those kinds of things. As a matter of fact, they started making fun of him. They started calling these little, they would, a lot of people were out of homes and were out on the street. And so they would get cardboard boxes, old scraps of wood, just basically anything that they could get a hold of to make sort of a lean-to, sort of a shack that they could live in. And they started, they would do this together, and they started calling them Hoovervilles, a little village that they felt like Hoover had made, during this time. And so that was one way they kind of poked fun at it. And of course, the media, like the media does now, if they like the president or dislike the president, they have a lot to do with people's attitudes toward the president and what the president's doing, and that sort of stuff. So you had Hoovervilles, these little villages they were building out of, just making shacks out of cardboard, out of scrap wood, basically anything they could find to kind of make a little shelter for themselves. Another thing that they would do, because you had a lot of these people sleeping out on the streets, they would get newspapers and they would stuff them in their clothes. They would lay it, wherever they were sleeping, they would take that and cover up with it. And so they called old newspapers Hoover blankets, again, to poke fun at President Hoover. And then men would take and put their hands in their pocket and pull the pockets out, let them, where there wasn't anything in their pockets. And they called those Hoover flags because they said, look, I have nothing, I don't have any money, don't have anything worth anything. And so my pockets are empty, and they would turn them inside out, and they would refer to those as Hoover flags during this time. So, Hoover, because he didn't do stuff, kind of got picked on. So, and like I said, the media drives a lot of that kind of stuff, what they're putting in the newspapers. And of course, now they have, newspapers and television and social media and all that kind of stuff. So, anyway, so there's some things about Hoover. During that time, about 25% of the people were out of work. So you think, well, 75% are working. 25% is not. That's not so bad. Well, it doesn't sound that way, but when you have that many people out of work, on the streets, you've got to, that was a big deal. Excuse me. And so anytime there's a crisis, Americans are very, very benevolent. We like to to help people who are in need. And so you have, they start these little soup kitchens where you could go and get a meal. I think there were some pictures in your book that shows these people lined up waiting to go to the soup kitchens to get a, look on page 668 and 669. That shows you, it says that, they were waiting, to come through to get a cup of soup because they didn't have, they've lost their jobs, they've lost money that they had in the stock market, money they had in the bank. Matter of fact, during this time, there was what was called a run on the banks. Somebody might say, well, I got $5,000, and back then, $5,000 would be a lot of money in the 1920s. They would go to the bank to get it, and the bank, at first, is able to give it out, but then so many people come and get it that they don't have the money, so they got to shut the bank, and of course that creates a panic. People hear, well, I can't get my money. What am I going to do? I can't go and get it out, and so that created problems. That started all over the country. That people trying to go get money out of the banks. I don't know if you have a savings account or not, but if you do, and you looked at the rules that they have, it would say in there somewhere that you can't get this money unless we have if it's a lot of money, of course, not just some little piddly amounts that most of us have, but you can't get this unless you let us know ahead of time, because we have to go out and we have to go collect it, because they take our money that we put in savings, they invest it, and then now they're paying less than 1% interest, so it's almost a waste of time to have money in the bank. You got to find some other place. But anyway, that's another story. But people were running and making runs on the banks, and so the banks were failing, and that was just creating all sorts of problems during that time. Hoover is getting blamed for all this stuff. He's not doing stuff. Around the country, you've got these annoying phone. You've got these people around the country who are they don't have a place to live, so they're just traveling around the country. They call them hobos. Today, people like that, we mostly call them homeless. Back, 30, 40 years ago, we called them bums. But today they're referred to as homeless people. But they would just wander around the country on, going places, just trying to find a free meal. As a matter of fact, on page 681 in your book, turn there, and it's got these symbols. They came up with their own system, so they were pretty organized. To find out where you could, for example, you see that one symbol shows you can go there and somebody would give you a meal. You could sit down and eat, and you got to, down at the bottom of that, you see this danger. Because some people didn't want those people coming around their property, I'm afraid of them. It's kind of like today, you've been taught since you were little. You don't talk to strangers, stuff like that, which I think we should talk to strangers personally. But anyway, they had those symbols you can see there. And so only bread given here, good place for a handout, sleep in the barn, good water. So that was, that's pretty cool how they came up with that as they traveled around the country. Also during this time, during the Great Depression, families would actually give their children away. If you were, and teenage boys especially, were just asked to leave home. Look, we can't take care of you. We don't have enough food to feed everybody. So the little children and girls, of course, they wouldn't send girls out like that, but boys would actually be sent away. And we'll see later in the next chapter when we study about what Franklin Roosevelt does, starts some of these programs. The CCC, we'll talk about that. But anyway, that was set up for these teenage boys. But they would give them away. It wasn't, there were times when at a fire station or a police station, they would come out and they would find a picnic basket, and it would have a new baby in it because they would leave a note, please take care of my baby. I can't take care of this. And this kind of stuff was going on in the country as the Depression got worse and worse. So you have these these situations going on all over the place. You got the handouts, you got the soup kitchens, that kind of stuff. Another big issue that came out, we'll talk about for a minute. Look on page 680. You see this map here of the United States, and it's called the Dust Bowl. And these, again, because farmers not using good farming methods, they've plowed the Great Plains that we've talked all year about, the Great Plains and John Deere inventing the tractor and Cyrus McCormick inventing the reaper and all that kind of those kind of things that we've talked about. Well, they're out there and they're plowing up, and they're not, like I say, they're not using good farm methods. They're not planting crops to enrich the soil again. They're not leaving fields vacant. So they're not doing what they should be doing. They're overusing it, and they had a drought came along during this time, and it became what was known as the Dust Bowl. So if you look on 680, you see there where that was. It was mainly in Oklahoma, but some other areas also experienced some of those problems. But reading those little things, hopefully you need to read the things that happened there. But it said that that it would get so dusty, and then the wind blowing. You see that picture there underneath the map, showing the people running to get inside from the Dust Bowl. They're saying And, it would turn dark in the middle of the day from all the dust flying around. You couldn't see the sun. Sometimes the sand would be blown up against doors. They couldn't get their doors open. If you ever lived anywhere, there's a lot of snow drifts and things like that. But this sand would shut the doors, or so you couldn't get out of your house. Just all kind of problems like that. But anyway, this dust would get up into the jet stream, and there's actually documented evidence that where people in New York City would hang their clothes out on the clothesline, and it would get dust and dirt on it coming all the way from Oklahoma. One situation that was documented, that out in the ocean, 500 miles from the Atlantic shore here in America, there were ships getting dust, and they said that was dust from from those storms out in Oklahoma and that area. So that was a really big deal, having all this dust. So that was just another way to exacerbate the situation the farmers were in. And so they couldn't keep their land, so the banks were coming to take their farms away. I see there was a picture of some sort of an auction where they were doing that. Yeah, that's back on page 671. You see these men all standing around. Looks like a house or a barn or something, and they're losing it. So they've got to do something. So a lot of them just kind of left their families and went out traveling around the country as a hobo. A lot of them at this time moved out to California looking for work. I don't know if you've ever had to read the book The Grapes of Wrath or of Mice and Men. If you haven't, you probably will eventually, either in high school English literature or definitely in college. But it was about this time in the Great Depression, and moving and all the things that took place. But yeah, just a lot of bad stuff was going on with this during this Great Depression. Make sure I've covered all the stuff that I intended to cover. So you'll be ready for this test on Thursday. Look at my notes here. Yeah, I think I've covered that pretty good. Turn to page, at the end of the section, end of the chapter, on, it's called 691 MC1 and MC2, 691. It's just got some pictures and some information about the Great Depression. That picture at the top of page 691 of that woman holding her child says that this picture became the most famous picture, the most renowned picture out of the Great Depression. But then looking at the other pictures, you see some of the situations that people were going through, things that they were coming up with once Franklin Roosevelt gets elected, coming up with to try to end the Depression, and it doesn't really end it. World War II ended the Depression. They're doing stuff. And a lot of the welfare system that we have now was started back during the Great Depression. Trying to help people, which is a good thing, and a lot of it stuck around, and some of it still does good, and some of it, in my opinion, doesn't. But that's just my opinion. That's got the chapter covered pretty good. Again, get the Zoom class meeting thing so we can do that. So maybe we can start where once I figure it out. Obviously, as you well know, I'm not real savvy on computer stuff, but I'm learning. I mean, I never thought I'd put something on YouTube, but I have. So anyway, if you can get that, so we can start meeting, and maybe we can have these these discussions where you can actually ask questions and I can ask questions and that sort of thing. Hope you're doing well. Stay safe, And I can't wait to see you again. Miss you guys a lot.